As you might know, professional athletes are capable of producing well over 1500 watts of output power during a sprint. Now, to put that in perspective, that's over 2 horsepower, which is kind of strange given that a horse is quite a bit bigger than a human. So what's going on here? So it might be a good idea to just start by quickly reminding ourselves of what power actually means in the first place. Power is the rate at which work is done. So what that means is essentially how much work is done per second, or per minute, per hour, whatever unit of time you decide to pick. Now usually work is measured in joules or Newton meters, and time is of course measured in seconds, which means power is measured in joules per second or Newton meters per second, which are equivalent. So 1 joule per second is exactly the same as 1 Newton meter per second. And there is a quicker way of saying that, which is 1 watt. So 1 watt of power means 1 joule or 1 Newton meter of work per second. That means 1500 watts would be 1500 joules or 1500 Newton meters per second, or in other words 1.5 kilowatts. But of course you don't have to measure power in watts or kilowatts, because there is another very popular unit for power, which is of course the horsepower. So 1 horsepower is equal to 744 watts. So the horsepower was invented by, ironically, James Watt, because James Watt made steam engines, and he wanted to sell those steam engines to people who were using horses at the time to drive machinery. And so he thought, well, people are now using horses to drive machinery, but I'm trying to sell my steam engine, so I'm going to quantify the performance of the steam engine in terms of how many horses it can replace. That was the idea of the horsepower, so that James Watt could say, look, this steam engine can replace X many horses in your, whatever you're trying to drive kind of machinery. So now, in order to do that, in order to measure the performance of a steam engine in terms of how many horses it represents, he needed to work out how much power 1 horse could output. So what he used is a contraption called a horse mill. So a horse mill is, as the name suggests, a horse-powered mill. This is the contraption that he used to measure the power output of a horse, and here's how he did it. So first of all, he measured the circumference of the horse mill. That way he knew how much distance the horse covered going round 1 rotation. Then he measured the force that the horse was applying to the wheel. And finally, he also counted how many times the wheel went round in 1 minute. So now he had all the information required to work out the power output of the horse. Because work is equal to force times distance, he knew the work that the horse did going round the mill 1 time. Finally, he also knew, as we discussed, how many times the wheel went round in 1 minute, and so therefore he knew how much work the horse did in 1 minute. And that turned out to be 33,000 foot-pounds of work per minute. In other words, 550 foot-pounds of work per second. And that's right, James Watt didn't use SI units like joules or Newton meters, he used foot-pounds, obviously. And if you take those 550 foot-pounds and convert them into Newton meters or joules, then you get 744. So that is why 1 horsepower is 744 watts. But then back to the main question of this video, how is it possible that a human can produce more than 2 horsepower, in some cases even more than 3 horsepower? Well, it has to do with endurance. You see, the horsepower was a measurement of the continuous power that a horse could output, because James Watt was interested in how much power can a horse produce in the production environment, right? Because this was all about horses versus steam engines driving machinery. And if you're in that kind of situation, you're interested in how much power can the horse provide over an extended period of time. You're not interested in how much power the horse could provide in 2 seconds, because there is not much use to that. So the horsepower was a measurement of the continuous power of the horse and not a measurement of the peak power of the horse. Whereas the figures that you see on these athletes producing over 2 horsepower, well, those are just peak outputs that only last for a few seconds. Humans cannot produce more than 1 horsepower for an extended period of time. So in conclusion, 1 horsepower is roughly the amount of power that a horse can output for an extended period of time, so the continuous output power of a horse, if you will. And of course, some horses will be a bit more powerful, 1.2 horsepower. Some horses might be a bit less powerful, they might only do 0.8 continuously. But 1 horsepower is in the ballpark for the average power that a horse is able to output for an extended amount of time. Humans are capable of producing more than that, but only in a very short sprint. If you're looking at a long, endurance race of some kind, a human can only output about 300 to 400 watts, which is significantly less. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and of course, thank you for watching.